He took her bedroom for a home office. His wife called it just a temporary move. But when Joanne found the deed in a dusty garage drawer, she found her voice too. Now, the mother they erased is the woman who sold their future before they could stop her. Sometimes reclaiming your name means burning the blueprint. I heard the hammer before I saw the change. A rhythmic pounding, not angry, not rushed, just mechanical, like someone marking time in reverse. I stood at the foot of the staircase, clutching the chipped mug I always used for morning tea. The hallway smelled faintly of sawdust and new paint. My room, once my safe place, was open, the door flung wide and filled with movement. Brielle stood inside, arms crossed, supervising two delivery men as they hauled in a sleek black desk. My nightstand had already been pushed into the hallway, its drawer partially open, revealing my reading glasses and a bottle of hand cream I hadn't touched in weeks. "What's going on?" I asked. Brielle didn't turn to face me. "We're setting up Colton's office. He's working from home more now. The commute's draining him." "But," I looked toward the room, was my bedroom." She finally looked at me. Her face didn't register malice, just mild irritation, like I'd questioned the temperature of soup she'd made. "We moved your things. You'll be more comfortable downstairs. The den's quieter anyway. No windows facing the street." I didn't answer right away. My fingers curled tighter around the mug. The heat had left it. The air was too quiet beneath the hammer's rhythm. Colton appeared behind her, sheepish and tired. "Mom, it's temporary. The downstairs has more space for you. We just thought it'd be better." He didn't meet my eyes. That's when I knew this had been decided long before today. I walked to the doorframe, staring into the room that used to be mine. The wallpaper was gone, painted over in a soft gray. My quilt, the one my mother stitched during my first pregnancy, was folded into a plastic bin. One of the movers accidentally kicked it aside. The desk looked like something from a tech catalog, cold, uninviting. Beside it stood a brand new ergonomic chair. My rocking chair, the one Colton gave me when Leo was born, was nowhere in sight. I didn't ask where it had gone. The walk down to the basement felt longer than usual. My knees protested with each step, but I didn't say a word. The den smelled musty, like it hadn't been opened in months. A twin mattress had been pushed against the far wall, made up with thin white sheets. My lamp was there. My books stacked neatly. The windows were small, half buried in soil, letting in barely enough light to tell the time of day. I set my mug on the nightstand, sat on the bed, and waited. They didn't come down. Dinner that evening was quiet. Colton worked on his laptop. Brielle scrolled on her phone, stopping only to comment about the new lamp arriving tomorrow. Leo asked where I'd gone and if I'd seen his soccer ball. No one mentioned the room. Later, I passed by the new office on the way to the kitchen. The light was on, the door slightly ajar. Colton was on a Zoom call. Brielle stood behind him, adjusting a frame on the wall. She noticed me but didn't acknowledge it. That night, I lay awake in the basement, watching the faint glow from the hallway light spill beneath the door. This wasn't cruelty. It was something worse. It was erasure, silent, efficient, painless, for them. I tried to reason with myself. He's stressed. She's trying to help. Maybe they thought I'd be more comfortable downstairs. Maybe they didn't mean it the way it felt. But that's the trick with displacement. It's never loud. It's the slow removal of self. One drawer emptied, one chair gone, one room reassigned. The next morning, I found the cardboard boxes outside the garage. My name scrawled across them in Brielle's handwriting. Inside, my knitting supplies, some old greeting cards, and a framed photo of Colton and me from his graduation. The frame was cracked. I carried it back inside, tucked it into the drawer of the nightstand in the basement, and closed it gently. Over the next few days, the upstairs turned into a space I was no longer invited into. Meetings, networking calls, decor decisions, Brielle always just finishing something when I entered. Colton too busy to talk. The house felt cleaner, sharper, colder. One afternoon, I walked by the door of my old room. The desk now held monitors, cables, and noise-canceling headphones. The bookshelf I once filled with novels now held Brielle's curated display of design books and neutral ceramics. My rocking chair, still missing. Later that week, I found it in the garage, covered with a tarp, next to an unused stroller and boxes labeled seasonal. I didn't move it. I just stood there for a while, staring at it. That night, I dreamed I was a coat hanging in a hallway closet. Present, useful, but only in the right weather. I woke up before sunrise, the silence pressing into my ears. I padded upstairs to make coffee. Brielle's new espresso machine already sat on the counter, gleaming under the kitchen light. My drip pot, my small ritual, had been pushed under the sink, behind cleaning supplies. That was when it finally settled in me. I no longer lived here. I just existed here, and no one cared enough to hide it anymore. It started small. The orange marmalade I liked suddenly vanished from the fridge, replaced with low-sugar chia jam in a glass jar with a clean white label that read artisanal. My labeled containers were pushed to the back of the shelves. The shelf I always used was now filled with prepped meals in identical glass containers, each one with a pastel sticker that read, Brielle only. One morning, I found my leftover meatloaf gone. When I asked about it, Brielle looked up from her phone, not unkindly, and said, "Oh, I thought it was expired. I'm doing a fridge cleanse for Leo's allergies." No one had told me Leo had allergies. He sat beside her, eating chicken nuggets. Mealtime changed, too. At first, it was just a shift in timing. Dinner was served earlier, 5:30 instead of 6. Then it was served without me. I'd come upstairs from the basement, following the smell of food, only to find empty plates in the sink and laughter lingering in the air. One night, I waited. Waited to be called up, waited for a knock. None came. I ate peanut butter toast in the den, listening to the footsteps upstairs fade into television noise. I told myself they were just busy, or distracted, or maybe I'd forgotten a new schedule. But it kept happening. I began to notice my coffee mug missing from the drying rack, the one Colton made for me in 3rd grade. Blue clay, chipped on one side. Best Mom, written in shaky paint. I found it later in a drawer with the mismatched Tupperware, buried beneath cracked lids. I held it in my hands and stared. Was this forgetfulness, or something else? Sometimes Brielle would reorganize things. My scarves folded differently, my books rearranged by color. The knitting needles I kept in the living room basket suddenly stored in the garage. Colton never said anything. He'd give me a half smile when I passed him in the hallway, the kind you give someone you recognize but don't want to talk to. I started measuring my presence, how much space I took, how much sound I made, how much silence I was given. Brielle never raised her voice. She never locked a door or threw out my things directly. But her message was clear. This was not my home. It was her house. And she just hadn't found the words or the nerve to ask me to leave. Until one morning, when I overheard her say it. I had gone upstairs early, before anyone else was up, to refill my water bottle. The kitchen lights were still off, the blinds drawn. I heard voices from the dining room. Brielle and her sister. "You have to get her out before summer," her sister whispered. "You can't go another year like this." "I know," Brielle said. "She's just always around. It's exhausting." I stood still, heart thudding. My fingers gripped the refrigerator handle. She's not even trying to help anymore. She just sits. And Colton's no help either. He says he'll talk to her, but he won't. "This is his house, after all," her sister added. That's what I told him. His house. Not ours. Not even theirs. His. But I wasn't part of the equation anymore. I backed away slowly and returned downstairs. Didn't eat that day. Didn't speak. Later that week, I was cleaning out a drawer in the laundry room when I found the note. Folded into a tight square, wedged between the detergent and dryer sheets. On pink stationery in Brielle's handwriting, "We just need her out before summer." After that, it's our space. No signature, no context, just clarity. I didn't cry. I just folded the note back and slid it into my apron pocket. I slept with it under my pillow for 2 nights before moving it to the drawer beside my bed, the one that used to hold greeting cards and Leo's drawings. Now it held silence. That evening, Colton sat beside me during a commercial break on the TV. "You doing okay down here?" he asked. I turned to him. His face still carried the softness of the boy I raised, but his eyes were distant, tired, disengaged. "I miss having dinner together," I said. He looked down at his hands. "Things have just been busy. You know how it is." "I don't actually," I replied, "because no one tells me anything anymore." He sighed. "Mom, This isn't personal. Brielle's just under a lot of stress. We're trying to build something here. The business, the house, it's all interconnected. And I'm not part of that? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He stood and left before the commercial ended. That was when I realized his silence wasn't passivity anymore. It was permission. He gave Brielle room to take mine. And she did it with precision. Room by room. Ritual by ritual. Until I was a ghost in a house I once held together with dinners and laundry and bedtime stories. Now I floated between corners, careful not to disturb the decor. Brielle wasn't always cruel. That would have been easier to understand. When she first entered our lives, she was polished, prepared, and pleasant to a fault. Her smiles were camera-ready, her compliments tailored like her designer jackets. I remember thinking she was trying too hard, and I assumed, like all things early in a marriage, the effort would ease into something warmer. Instead, it calcified. She never yelled, she never scolded, but her control was absolute. Every piece of the house shifted gradually, like furniture you don't remember moving, but suddenly find unfamiliar. Her world was one of whites and neutrals, surfaces that gleamed, and rooms that looked like catalog spreads. The old Afghan I crocheted sat folded in the laundry room after she reorganized the living room. My recliner, once placed by the window, vanished, replaced with a tufted chair she warned Leo not to touch because it's too expensive to sit on. The message wasn't just about taste, it was about territory. Flashbacks sometimes clawed their way in, moments from the early days when she seemed to make an effort. The time she brought me chamomile tea and asked about my childhood. The day she invited me to a spa with her, though she spent the whole time on her phone. Back then, I excused the disconnection. Now I recognize the performance. It was never about connection, it was about image. At dinner parties, she played hostess with an ease that belied calculation. Her laughter was always a second too loud. Her praise of Colton always tilted toward branding. "He's such a visionary," she'd say. Not "he's kind" or "he's thoughtful." Everything in their world was curated, from the wine bottles with minimalist labels to the background playlists of ambient jazz. And then came the jokes. They started gently. "She's still using a flip phone. Can you believe it?" she said once, and I laughed along. It was true after all. But it escalated. "She still writes paper checks like it's 1998. She keeps boxes labeled sewing supplies. I didn't even know people sewed anymore. She uses powder detergent." Each time Guess would laugh, and each time Colton said nothing. Eventually, even the jokes sharpened. I asked her not to hang that photo. It didn't match the color palette. She rearranged the spice rack. Again. I swear, she forgets on purpose. It's like living with a teenager, only one who remembers Reagan. They laughed. I smiled. My hands stayed folded in my lap. I started showing up to dinner parties only when absolutely necessary. Then, not at all. When I stopped coming, no one asked why. My world shrank to the den and the hours when no one was home. I learned to move silently, cleaning dishes when they'd left the house, folding laundry no one asked me to touch. I took refuge in the smallest routines, brushing Leo's hair before school, laying out placemats at breakfast. Things Brielle never explicitly banned, but slowly claimed as hers. Even Leo noticed. When his mom snapped at him for tracking mud across the tile floor, he looked at me, not at her. When I handed him his lunchbox with the napkin note tucked inside, he squeezed my hand too long for a boy his age. When I sat alone on the porch one afternoon, he brought me a juice box and said, "I know you don't like these, but they're cold." I smiled. "It's perfect." He nodded, sat beside me for a moment, and then ran back inside. Quiet rebellions, small and sacred. Brielle ruled that house without ever needing to raise her voice. She edited me out of the narrative like a bad draft, cropped out of family photos, excluded from decisions, turned into a silent accessory in a home I helped them afford, raise children in, and keep together when things nearly fell apart. Once, she found me stitching a hole in Leo's jacket. "Don't worry about that," she said lightly. "We'll just get him a new one." "He likes this one," I said. She blinked. "Right, but it's pretty worn." I said nothing more, just kept stitching. My hands were slower now, less sure, but still capable. That evening, I overheard her on the phone. "She's sweet, but she's kind of stuck in a different era. It's like having an antique that still makes noise. An antique that still makes noise. That one stuck. More than the jokes, more than the exclusions, because it was the closest she'd come to the truth. I wasn't a person to her. I was a fixture, something outdated, a relic to move around, store in the basement, or eventually phase out. And Colton let her. His silence had matured into strategy. He avoided conflict like it was contagious, nodded during her critiques, shrugged when I asked about changes, told me I was overthinking it when I once dared to bring it up. She's just trying to keep the house running, Mom. You know how she is. Yes, I did. And I knew he didn't want to choose, because choosing me meant questioning her, and he wasn't willing to do that. So I disappeared from dinner parties, from the kitchen, from the living room, until even my shadow seemed misplaced. But Leo kept looking for me in the quiet. And as long as he did, I stayed. Even if I didn't belong anymore. The door was always open now, but it wasn't an invitation. My old bedroom, once soft with floral quilts and the smell of lavender balm, had become a tech showroom. Colton's new office. From the hallway, it looked like a place that repelled warmth. Black desk, 3 monitors mounted in a row, a leather gaming chair with red stitching that stood too tall, too proud. Cords like veins stretched under the desk, snaking into power strips and hubs. A new printer still in its box. Books with titles I didn't recognize, lined perfectly on the shelf that used to hold my family photos. No one called it my room anymore. Now it was the office. Colton's voice often drifted down the stairs. Confident, collected. Presentations, Zoom meetings, crypto calls. Each word felt like an echo in a house I used to fill with lullabies. I'd stand in the hallway sometimes, quiet, listening, watching, waiting. There was nothing left of me in that room, not even a photograph. And yet, I couldn't stop looking. The carpet was new, cold gray. The windows, which I once dressed with lace curtains, were now framed in blackout blinds. My nightstand, white, antique, a gift from my own mother, was gone. I'd helped design that room when Colton and Brielle first moved in. It was supposed to be a nursery then. I remembered picking out soft green paint and cloud decals. I remember Colton painting the walls too thick and Brielle laughing as she wiped the drips with a sponge. It was the last time the 3 of us worked on something together. I'd found the perfect rocking chair on a resale app, spent hours sanding and staining it. That chair had rocked Leo through fevers and teething and first steps. Now it was buried under lawn equipment in the garage. I asked once softly where the chair had gone. "Oh," Brielle said. "It didn't fit the new layout. We're going for clean lines. Minimalist." Minimalist. A word that sounded like a verdict. I stood in the doorway one morning and said, "It's very different now." Colton, adjusting his second monitor, didn't look up. "It's more functional." Brielle walked in carrying a basket of folded laundry. "This space is productive now," she said. Her tone was chipper but final. I nodded. Then I went out the back door and into the garage. It was cold. The light flickered when I turned it on. The rocking chair was there, covered in dust, one leg wobbling slightly. My name was still etched under the seat in faint pencil. For Mom, for love, for always. Colton had written it when he assembled it with me. I sat on the edge of the workbench and cried quietly. No one came looking. Through the garage door's vent slats, I could hear laughter from upstairs. It felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Later that evening, I went looking for an old toolbox to fix the loose leg on the chair. I opened a drawer in the metal cabinet we never used anymore. Inside, tucked between old instruction manuals and a rusted hammer, I found a yellow envelope. It was thick. On the front, written in neat, sharp penmanship, were the words, "Property, joint title, Rose Hill Lane." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents I hadn't seen in over a decade. Deed records, title agreements. My name listed right beside Colton's, in bold ink. I was still a partial co-owner of the house. I blinked, unsure if I was reading it right. A memory surfaced. Years ago, when we first discussed selling my own home to help them buy this one, Colton insisted it made sense to put my name on the deed. "It's your money, Mom. You're making it possible. You'll always have a place with us." I'd trusted him, then forgotten. Until now. I sat on the garage floor, legs stiff, heart louder than the furnace upstairs. They had taken the room. They had taken my voice. But they hadn't taken my claim. I pressed the documents to my chest, not out of greed, but out of grounding. I still belonged here, not just in memory, not just in legacy, in law. I stayed in the garage a while longer, letting the reality settle. Tomorrow I'd make a copy of those papers. And maybe, just maybe, I'd stop apologizing for being in a place that was still partly mine. My mother didn't raise me to speak. She raised me to survive. The first lesson was delivered in the kitchen, over the clatter of pots and the hiss of boiling water. I was 8, maybe 9, crying because a neighbor boy had called me plain. She slapped a dish towel on the counter and snapped, "Don't make noise, Joanne. Be pleasant." It wasn't anger in her voice. It was instruction, urgent, practiced. That phrase became the foundation of every room I walked into for the next 60 years. I learned early that a girl who didn't cause trouble earned permission to exist. My mother kept her voice soft, her opinions quieter. She ironed my father's shirts until the pleats were military sharp, and never once corrected him in front of guests. When I asked once why she never sat down to eat with us until everyone was halfway through, she said, "A woman's pride is in her service." I repeated that at my bridal shower. The women clapped. I married young, not out of desperation, but out of obligation. Paul was steady, dependable, a man who shook hands firmly and called his mother every Sunday. He didn't raise his voice, not even when he was angry, but he had expectations, clear, unwavering ones. He admired my quiet, said it was soothing. I learned not to interrupt. He'd talk through dinner about his work. I'd nod and smile. Once I offered an idea about a project. He paused, then said, "You don't need to worry about that, Joe. That's my world." He kissed my forehead after, called me his calm. The praise felt like cement. I watched myself vanish, smile by smile. When Colton was born, I poured everything into motherhood. I read every book, cooked every meal from scratch. Paul complimented my roast, never my exhaustion. I was thanked but rarely seen. And when Paul died, I didn't cry at the funeral. I stood there, clutching my purse, repeating, "Be pleasant, be polite, don't make noise." Even then, it was instinct. Even grief had a script. Years passed, and I told myself I'd been loved. That love didn't always have to be loud, but sometimes I wondered if it had to be so quiet. Colton grew into his father, kind, composed, and trained not to look too closely. When he brought Brielle home, I recognized the type. Sharp, certain, vision-driven. She filled a room without raising her voice, and I watched her do to me what I had once allowed men to do to my mother. Erase. Not out of hate, but out of design. And I, just like my mother, let it happen, telling myself it was easier not to fight, easier to survive in silence than live in defiance. I became exactly what she taught me to be: invisible, tidy, useful. Then one afternoon, searching for old photos in a keepsake box I hadn't opened in years, I found a letter tucked in the bottom. No envelope, just folded pages, written in Paul's hand. "Joanne, if you're reading this, it means I never had the courage to say it aloud. I know how much you gave up, how much of yourself you bent to make everything work. I see it now. I saw it before, but I didn't know how to honor it. I should have made room for your voice, not just your presence. I thought love was security, but love is recognition. You were always more than calm. You were power under pressure. If there's anything left in my name, take it, use it, reclaim what's yours. Don't stay small to keep others comfortable. Not again. Paul." I sat there, floor cold beneath me, holding the weight of a man I had lived beside for 4 decades. Maybe he didn't say it in time, but he said it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me. I left just after sunrise. No suitcase, no note, just my coat, my handbag, and the folded letter from Paul tucked into my pocket. The house was silent. Brielle's espresso machine blinked in standby mode. Colton's laptop sat on the counter, open to a spreadsheet. Upstairs, the faint hum of white noise machines. I slipped out the front door, like a whisper. No one stopped me. The sky was the color of dishwater, and the pavement still slick from last night's rain. My feet moved with no plan, just motion, like I was proving to myself I could still choose where they went. I walked until the suburban houses gave way to shuttered storefronts, until I found a diner that looked like it hadn't been redecorated since the year I got married. The booths were red leather, cracked in places, And the waitress didn't ask questions. She poured tea into a chipped white mug and left me alone. I watched the steam rise, then fade. No one called, no text, no missed call, no voicemail asking, "Where are you, Mom?" I stayed at that table for over an hour. The tea went cold. The waitress refilled it. I didn't drink the second cup either. Outside, the day started to shift. Cars rolled past. A mother and daughter argued at the crosswalk. A man in a blue coat laughed too loudly at something on his phone. The world was moving, and I wasn't missed. I left a tip even though I'd barely touched my drink. Next stop, downtown. It took 2 buses and a short walk. I hadn't been back to my first apartment in over 4 decades. It wasn't much to look at anymore. Probably wasn't back then either. But the brick was still red, and the mailbox still crooked. Apartment 2B. That place was mine before I ever knew what it meant to belong somewhere. I remembered the couch I bought secondhand, the way I used to sit and dream of writing a book, of starting a business, of living fully. Back then, I had ideas, before I learned to quiet them. I stood across the street from the building for several minutes, wondering if anyone inside would notice the old woman staring. No one did. I kept walking. Made my way to where the bookstore used to be, Mr. Ferris's shop, where I worked on weekends in college, where I read poetry behind the register when it was slow. Now it was a vape shop, black windows, neon signs. The soul of the street had changed. I sat on a nearby bench and watched a pigeon strut like it owned the place. "Good view?" a voice said beside me. I turned. A man, maybe late 60s, dressed like a professor, corduroy jacket, leather briefcase worn at the edges. I offered a polite smile. "Used to be something else, this place." "Isn't that always the way?" he said. "You blink and the story rewrites itself without you." I nodded. He watched me for a moment. "You look like someone who just erased themselves from a chapter." I didn't respond, but I didn't look away. "Sometimes," he added gently, "disappearing is the only way to be remembered." I blinked. That was exactly how it felt. Before I could think too much, I stood. "Do you know any good attorneys around here?" He arched a brow. "Depends on what kind of truth you're looking to settle." His card said Elliot Hartman, estate law. An hour later, I was sitting across from him in a quiet office that smelled faintly of lemon oil and leather-bound judgment. I handed over the property documents, the ones I'd found in the garage. Elliot read in silence. "You still hold a partial title," he said, "and based on the capital investment you made at purchase, quite a significant one." I swallowed hard. They never mentioned that. Why would they? It's not in their interest for you to know what you're worth. He said it kindly, but it still hit like a slap. He flipped through more papers, eyes scanning quickly. "Also," he said, "your husband filed amendments to his estate plan 3 years before he passed. Did you know?" I shook my head. "His original executor passed away, but the backup trustee, you, were never contacted. Which means, Mrs. Grayson, you may be entitled to more than just a room." I stared at him. "Like what?" Elliot folded his hands. "Like a controlling interest in the property, possibly in Colton's business, depending on how the structure was written." I blinked. I didn't know any of this. Most people don't. That's how they lose their voices. Not by being shouted over, but by never being told what was theirs in the first place. The silence between us settled like dust. He handed me a folder. "Take this. Read it. Come back when you're ready to decide who you want to be in this story." I left his office as the sun began to set. The city looked different now. Not new, but clearer. It was the first time in years I felt like I had a name outside of mom or guest or burden. Joanne Grayson. And I had decisions to make. Elliot's office was still. No ticking clock. No ambient music. Just the faint sound of rustling paper and the heavier sound of memory moving. He slid the final document across the table. "This is your husband's last signed amendment. It was formalized 3 years before he passed." My hands hovered above the folder. For a moment, I didn't touch it. There was something sacred about a man's words delivered years after his voice had vanished. I opened it and read the first line. "Joanne Grayson is hereby named controlling beneficiary and trustee of the Grayson Family Trust, including all land assets and intellectual properties therein." I blinked. Brielle's name wasn't there. Colton's was, but not as heir. He was listed as a contingent partner, A secondary. I kept reading. There it was again. My name, bold and legal. Controlling interest in Rose Hill Acres. The land Paul inherited from his father, long dormant, but always spoken of like myth. There was also something unexpected. IP rights. Grayson Software Holdings. I looked up. Intellectual property? Elliot nodded. Your husband invested in a tech patent years ago. He didn't talk about it much. It didn't take off at the time, but your son used it as a foundational structure for his startup. I sat back, stunned. I didn't know any of this. You weren't supposed to. Not until now. But why? Elliot leaned forward. Paul made it clear. He trusted you to see things clearly, to act when the time was right. He said, and I quote, "Joanne will know when it matters. She's always seen the truth before anyone else." The words landed with weight I wasn't prepared for. Paul had built me a door, and I'd never seen it. I thought back to something he said once, late at night, when Colton was still young and we were sharing a cup of tea in the backyard. I'd asked him why he never brought me into his business affairs. He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "Someday, use this to do something they never saw coming." I thought he meant my kindness. Turns out he meant control. A silence settled in my chest, quiet but full. Not grief, not relief, something heavier, something powerful. "What can I do with all of this?" I asked. Elliot tilted his head. "That depends. Do you want them to know?" I thought of Brielle's white walls, of my rocking chair buried in the garage, of the note. "We just need her out before summer." "No," I said. "Not yet." He nodded, as though he'd expected it. "There's one more detail," he added. He pulled out another paper, thinner, more modern. "This is from the state's business registry. Your son's company is technically built on a licensing clause tied to the original Grayson IP. That IP was held in your name after Paul's restructure." My eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "Colton's startup, his product, his code, his pitch decks, can't be legally sold without your signature." I stared at him. "You're not just an owner, Mrs. Grayson. You're a gatekeeper." The room suddenly felt smaller. They don't know this? I doubt it. Most people don't read the fine print when ambition is louder than patience. I stood. My legs felt steadier than they had in months. I folded the documents and slid them into my purse, not the old leather bag they mocked me for. A new one I'd bought quietly last week, sleek, software functional. On the way out, Elliot walked me to the door. "Be careful," he said. "Power reveals people." I smiled. I'm counting on it. I spent the next week reading everything I could. Contracts, property assessments, startup bylaws, patent registries. Things I'd once believed belonged in Colton's world, not mine. But I understood enough. The land, my land, was collateral. Rose Hill Acres, the property I sold my old home to help them buy, had been quietly leveraged by Colton as the financial backbone of his tech company. Hidden in layers of legalese, the paperwork made it sound strategic, neutral. But it wasn't neutral to me. That land was family. That land was legacy. And they never asked. Worse still, Brielle's name appeared where I never expected to see it. Not as an owner, not even a shareholder. She was a silent partner. The documents were clear. She'd invested early, anonymously, through a trust fund tied to her maiden name. Smart, invisible, powerful. I traced the formation timeline. She'd made her first contribution just 3 months after I moved into the basement. While I was folding Leo's school uniforms and trying not to cry into my pillow, she was strategizing control. That night, I dreamed of the dining room table, of the time Colton brought home pitch decks and whiteboards and late-night ramen, asking for moral support while he built his future. I'd offered opinions once, just once. "You should think about integrating rural access," I said. "People in remote towns never get tech tailored to them." Brielle smirked. "It's cute that you care about farms." The room laughed. Colton looked away. I excused myself early that night and ate leftovers cold in the den. Now I knew. They weren't just erasing me from dinners. They were building their dream on top of my silence. I began printing everything, building a folder. I labeled it Possibilities. It felt like armor. I visited the bank, quietly updated access credentials, consulted a second lawyer for good measure, every move careful, every document copied twice. The next morning, I received a voicemail. Not from Colton, not from Brielle, from a woman named Kira Sandin. Hi, Mrs. Grayson. I'm reaching out from Meridian Ventures. We recently came across your name in association with Grayson Tech. We're interested in speaking with you about a potential acquisition. I nearly dropped the phone. I called her back. Kira explained the offer. High 6 figures, perhaps more with negotiation. The buyer didn't just want the software, they wanted the story, the package, the idea. But they needed one signature to begin due diligence. Mine. Only mine. I thought Colton, I started. Kira cut in gently. He's not listed as the primary controller on record. You are. I sat still for a long time after we hung up, not out of fear, but awe. I had spent years shrinking to survive. And now the world had come knocking. Not for forgiveness, not for charity, but for permission. Colton's dreams, it turned out, were built on foundations I laid. And Brielle's schemes? They were rooted in my trust. I had a choice, not just about the startup, about the story. I opened my possibilities folder and wrote a name across the front in permanent marker, mine. It began with a quiet email. Subject line, Meridian Ventures finalization documents enclosed. I opened it before breakfast, steam rising from my tea as I read the terms. I had already reviewed every clause, every exit strategy, every implication. The numbers were clear. The leverage was mine. All I had to do was sign. So I did. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just one signature, exact and firm, like the woman I'd almost forgotten I could be. Elliot met me at a quiet cafe to notarize. We sat in a corner booth. His suit was grayer than usual, his tone calm. Once this goes through, he said, they'll be blindsided. I know, I replied, sipping my tea, but they shouldn't be. They were too busy building castles on someone else's land. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds, but the wind was gentle. My kind of day, unassuming, unbothered, full of power tucked under gray. The final signatures slid across the table. I didn't rush. I read every word. Not for accuracy, for ownership, for closure. As I signed, I thought of Brielle's voice echoing in my old room. This space is productive now. I thought of Colton, eyes skimming over me like I was background noise. I didn't need revenge. I needed restoration. And this quiet transaction in a cafe with no audience, was it. By midday, the documents were filed, escrow initiated, ownership officially transferred. I walked to the park afterward, coat buttoned to the neck, wind kissing my cheek. I sat on a bench facing the pond, watching ducks ripple across the surface. My phone buzzed in my purse. I didn't check it. Somewhere, just across town, Colton would be checking his. I imagined him at the kitchen island, coffee half sipped, opening an email with Meridian's letterhead. I pictured the frown spreading as he scrolled through phrases like controlling stakeholder and executed transfer. Then I imagined the silence that would fall after he read the name. Joanne Grayson, his mother, the ghost in the basement, the antique that still made noise. I could see him rushing into the home office, my old bedroom. I could see Brielle looking up from her laptop, brows tightening. The same room where they erased me would now echo with the sound of consequence. And yet, I sat on that bench, calm, because this wasn't sabotage. It was reclamation. I hadn't taken anything from them. I'd simply taken back what was always mine. When I finally opened my phone, there were 9 missed calls, 3 from Colton, 1 from Brielle. The rest were unknown numbers. A new voicemail blinked. I didn't press play. Instead, I opened a new message from Kira at Meridian. Dear Mrs. Grayson, welcome to the Meridian family. We are proud to build legacies with women who never lost their power, just their platform. Kira Sandin, managing partner. I hadn't known the full story of Meridian until that morning. Elliot had casually mentioned it during our meeting. It's a woman-led investment group, he'd said, run by women over 50. Their mission is to fund innovations born from experience, not just ambition. I had paused then, the words sitting in my chest like truth. They didn't buy Colton's dream. They invested in my resurrection. I stood from the park bench, the afternoon light shifting behind me. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward myself. They arrived at dusk, just as the wind began to lift the porch chimes. Brielle in her trench coat, hair immaculate, jaw tight. Colton beside her, eyes rimmed red. Not from tears, but from panic. He didn't know whether to lead or follow. He'd never learned to do either without someone else's script. I stayed seated on the porch, my new porch. A small cottage, modest and quiet, nestled on the edge of a wooded path. The kind of place that makes silence feel like safety, not sentence. They didn't ask to come in. Brielle spoke first. How could you go behind our backs like this? Our? I asked calmly. She faltered. Colton stepped forward. Mom, this affects everything we've built. You built it on land you didn't own, I said. Ideas you didn't protect, silence you never questioned. We thought, no, I cut in softly but clearly. You hoped I'd stay quiet forever. Brielle's eyes narrowed. You could have talked to us. I met her gaze. You don't talk to ghosts. You decorate around them. The words hung there. Colton ran a hand through his hair. This wasn't supposed to be a war. It isn't, I said. It's an awakening. I stood then, slow but steady, and walked inside for a moment. When I returned, I was holding the blanket I'd crocheted for Colton when he was 9. Blue with yellow borders, frayed in corners, but still warm. I placed it gently in his hands. This was yours once, I said, like this house was mine. You just repainted the walls. He said nothing. His hands trembled slightly as he held it. Brielle turned away, biting her lip. I looked at her, not with hatred but with clarity. You didn't take my power, I said. I gave it away, and now I've taken it back. Their silence was louder than any apology could have been. A figure shifted near the tree line. Leo. He'd been waiting near the car, watching. I stepped forward, unsure if he'd come closer. He did. He wrapped his arms around me before I could even bend. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't know how to fix it. You didn't break it, I said softly into his shoulder. He pulled back, looked me in the eye. You're still my home. Then he turned and followed his parents, leaving behind the kind of peace that only truth can carry. They drove off in silence, and I returned to my porch, the wind softer now. Inside, the kettle began to whistle. The cottage wasn't grand, but then again, nothing about starting over should be. It sat just beyond the curve of a quiet lake, tucked between pine and maple, with shutters the color of antique jade. I chose it for the morning light, the way it touched every inch of the small kitchen before the world even stirred. I filled the bookshelves first. My favorites, long packed away in forgotten boxes, now lined the walls again. Audre Lorde, Adrienne Rich, and cookbooks with handwritten notes tucked between pages. I planted basil in the kitchen windowsill and filled the pantry with jars I'd labeled by hand. On Sundays, I baked bread, not to impress anyone, but because the smell reminded me that I was still here, still making, still whole. In the afternoons, I walked the garden I planted along the back fence. Lavender, tomato, sage, things that needed patience, not perfection. A reflection of me now. The quiet wasn't loneliness anymore. It was ownership. I started a blog. I never expected to. But something about the rhythm of writing again, just for me, reminded me that words were power. And I had silenced mine too long. The blog's name? Late Bloomers, Voices Over 60. I shared my story in pieces, not everything, just the feelings, the invisible parts. The questions women like me were never encouraged to ask. When did you stop recognizing yourself? What do you want now that no one's watching? Who were you before they told you who to be? Emails trickled in, then poured. Stories from strangers who felt like sisters, widows, retired nurses, former homemakers, women who hadn't spoken for decades and suddenly found words waiting in their throats. One day I heard a knock. Sophie, 11 years old, lived 2 doors down, hair in a tangled braid, scuffed sneakers, a nervous frown she didn't bother to hide. Do you have sugar? She asked. I handed her the bag, and she didn't leave. She sat on my porch swing and stared at her shoes. My mom says my dad isn't coming back, she said, voice too flat for her age. But I'm supposed to smile. I hate smiling, I nodded. Smiling is overrated, I told her. So is pretending. She came back the next day, and the next. Some days we said little. Others she asked hard questions. I never gave her easy answers. We baked muffins. We made paper flowers. She helped me build a birdhouse. One afternoon she asked, "Were you ever scared of not being wanted?" All the time, I said. She blinked. What did you do? I leaned close and whispered, I remembered who I was before they told me who to be. She didn't speak, but she smiled, not the forced kind, the real kind. Weeks later, she painted a sign and nailed it to the edge of my garden. Joanne's place for brave women and birds. I left it there. Then came the email from a magazine. No name, no branding, just a subject line, a story that matters. They wanted to feature one of my blog posts, the one about the rocking chair and the silence. They asked if I'd go by Anonymous Woman. I said yes. The article went live 2 weeks later. It was called The Woman Who Rebuilt Her Own Freedom. By morning, my inbox was flooded. The world didn't know my name, but they knew my truth. And that was enough. Legacy isn't what we pass down. It's what we protect, what we reclaim, what we choose to carry, and what we finally set down. For a long time, I thought legacy meant obedience, preservation, traditions passed along like fine china, cracked at the edges but too sacred to discard. But I've learned that some heirlooms are burdens, and some names don't deserve to be inherited. What I've built now doesn't need my surname to survive. It lives in the quiet bravery of women who read my words and whisper back their own. It lives in the laughter of Sophie as she tells me about her new hamster and her science fair project on volcanoes. It lives in Leo, now in college, visiting for weekends with his future wife, a girl who calls me Jojo and brings me homemade jam. They sit on my porch and talk like nothing ever cracked us. Because that's the thing about love that isn't performative. It doesn't need to heal loudly. I still write letters, but now, they're to the girl I used to be. This one I've kept. Dear Joanne, you weren't weak. You were waiting. Waiting for someone to listen. Waiting for the silence to stop being a virtue. You survived with grace, but that's not the same as thriving. I see you now. Every version of you. And I forgive you for staying small to make others comfortable. You were never lost. You were just unclaimed. Now you belong to yourself. Love, you. The letter sits in a frame near my desk, beside a photo of my garden in full bloom and a dried sprig of lavender from my first harvest here. The blog has grown. We had our first meetup in May. 15 women, aged 60 to 83, gathered at a small retreat cabin with folding chairs, thermoses, and stories. Some of them hadn't spoken aloud in years. Some had too much to say and no room left in their lives to say it. But we all cried, and then we laughed. And then we made a list on a chalkboard titled Things We Are Reclaiming. Among the scribbles were words like time, voice, peace, agency, music, pride, legacy. The sun was setting as we packed up that night, the kind of golden dusk that melts across water like a benediction. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home. Not because I was tired, but because I finally understood what it meant to arrive. There's no need to revisit Brielle and Colton's story now. Not because I've forgotten, but because silence, when chosen, is no longer a cage. It's a boundary. Their chapter closed itself. I didn't slam the door. I just walked through it. And every step since has been mine. I didn't get lost. I walked away. There's a difference. If this story made you pause, it means a part of you recognized the silence. Share it with someone who needs to remember their voice. Because healing isn't loud, it's contagious. And somewhere, another woman is waiting for permission to reclaim herself. Let's make sure she doesn't have to wait alone.